people who are involved in the final product. If you put 2010 down here in the English version. Because you start with, in 1682, with in the court of the Sun King, who founds La Petite Résurrection des Templiers, which means the little resurrection of the Templars. And this, they call it a licentious, group of people who drank a lot and had parties, and, it wasn't an extremely serious organization. Or maybe it was, but maybe it was like us. Maybe they were having fun and they were doing very important work. But by 1705, Philippe d'Orléans, who was a prince of the blood, they call it in France, he had a new statute written. And probably, that's this one here. We don't know how many times that's been redacted, right? But we do know that a lot of what's in this came from that period. So it's much older than what actually appears as 1831 in the final large publication or broad publication of the work. And this is where the conspiracy theories start. Because look who was here. And an Italian, Father Bonani. Father Bonani was a Jesuit priest and a very close friend of Philippe d'Orléans. He was a confidant. And by all accounts, he's the man. He had extensive canonical law background as a Jesuit, and he was very interested in all kinds of interesting things, and things that would make Umberto Eco blush. So Father Bernani is probably involved in the construction of the statue. And I think that's wonderful, because going back to my first statement about the Senecal Sisters, well, the Senecal Sisters, I don't know if you've read about them since you've been here, but they use Ignatian spirituality. So we have another thing in common with the sisters here. The Jesuit drive for education, clarification, recapitulation, theory, language, art, and culture is something that has blessed this country, especially in this area, all the way to Notre Dame in Indiana. Quite possible that he was interested in what we were doing. Remembering that at the foundation of the church itself, after it was legal, that we had two Roman Catholic bishops. Now, we call them constitutional bishops because the French state reserved the right to send the short list to Rome. But a lot of states did that. Historically, Spain, for example, has had the right to do that because they got the name and the title of the most Catholic kings. So you had, and actually the French did too, as a Christian king. So this is a prerogative that many governments have. And it causes problems, like in China, you've probably seen. But nevertheless, they are Roman Catholic bishops. And so when you get to the foundation of the church, you have Guillaume Mauviel, who, by the way, is not Haitian. He was from Normandy. He spent time in Haiti, but he was a constitutional bishop who was sent from the Mother Church in France to Haiti. And one of his friends, who was actually very, very much admired by Dr. Fabre-Palaprat, his name, he was affectionately known as Abbé Grégoire. And he was, I'll get to him later, but he's very important to the sort of reception of the Levitikon, looking at the vellum manuscript and understanding its meaning. and its validity. So I want to try to address some of the mumbo jumbo and talk a little bit about the provenance of the book itself. Now, an interesting question came up in my parish when I gave the first one of these lectures a few months ago. Someone asked me, where is it? And we don't know. We don't know. I have some ideas, but I haven't been able to prove them yet. But as many of you know, if you know me, you know that I'm pretty cynical and I like footnotes. So I like to define myself, and I like perspective. Perspective is everything for me. So I like to look at what my enemies are saying about me first. That's probably the Italian in me. Well, there was a book that was sort of like a huge book like this. It had, I think, no fewer than 6 or 7 books themselves that were the memoirs of a socialite of the time. She was known as, her title was, she was a marquise. She was the Marquise de Ducréqui, and she has an enormous name. But she wrote, or her son or her nephew wrote her memoirs. She lived from the monarchy, so from Louis XVI, she was an adult in the court. She was very close to the court. And she lived through the whole period that we cover here. So roughly, well, not 1682, but from, say, 1750 to, or no, 1780 to 1812, that period. So you have a lot of stuff going on in French history. So she says, in her memoir, she was a devout Roman Catholic, by the way, and she was an old guard, so it was king, family, God. And God was represented by the Pope in Rome. She said that the 8th century vellum manuscript was discovered at a bookstall in the Quai des Gèvres by Dr. Bernard-Raymond fabre-palaprat. She said that fabre-palaprat purchased the gilt volume for 25 francs, which, by the way, in those days was a lot of money. A lot of money. So people say, oh, you know, he picked it up in a book cart by a second-hand dealer. Read your history, 25 francs in 1804 was a lot of money. Another thing that we need to remember about that history and that little story is that you had the French Revolution, in which people were murdered and put out of their homes, and entire libraries were sold off or burned. Convents were sacked. You get the picture. By the time you get to the consulate, so the early Napoleonic period, there's an enormous amount of antiquities, valuable books, relics, religious items, breviaries, you name it, that are circulating. And people need money. So it's most probable that if you've ever been to Paris, you know the Quai des Gèvres, because when you're near Place Saint-Michel, you're directly across the river from where Notre Dame is, there is a huge, what they call a quai, which is the side of the river bank, and they have all those booksellers. They still have them there, and they have, even to this day, leather-bound volumes that go for a lot of money. They're, sometimes 17th, 18th, and certainly 19th century books that you can buy right there. There are also antiquarian book dealers in that area. So not at all weird. There's nothing unusual about that. So, according to her, this is very detailed. I have no idea how she got all this information. So he showed it to a certain Monsieur Dacier, who dated the vellum to the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Constantine V, who reigned from 741 to 775. So, although she was an opponent, the Marquise also mentions that Dr. Fabre-Palaprat, quote, at last found a conscientious translator who left everything blank that was no longer legible. So this leads to another question that will probably come up in the discussion and your questions, which is, why are there things missing in the Gospels? Well, it could be intentional, or there could be things missing. We don't know. I would like to say that we know, but we don't know for sure. I think that it's probable that there wasn't very much missing from the Gospels. I say that because those of you who've studied in seminary know that when we look at something like the Nag Hammadi Library in its academic form, and God said, these lines, that's probably how it would look. So there would be something missing. And it doesn't read like that at all. If you read the Gospel as it exists now in English, there's no gaps. And I didn't change anything. It's in English exactly the way it was in French. So there was no kind of gap at all. It begs the question, of course, of the last chapters. But I'll get to that in a minute. So, according to Fabre-Palaprat, the manuscript that he purchased was in Greek on large leaf parchment with gold lettering bearing the date 1154. He maintained that it was a copy of a 5th century manuscript preserved by Greek monks. So you have 3 dates now. It was a 7th century vellum manuscript from the reign of Byzantine Emperor Constantine, so it's between 741 and 775. And then they call it a 5th century manuscript, that it was taken from a 5th century manuscript. So it's even earlier. So you've made it back pretty far. Fabre-Palaprat himself wrote that the manuscripts in question were, quote, examined with scrupulous attention by a large number of men capable of judging, among others, by the learned and illustrious Gregoire, former Bishop of Blois, who testified to their authenticity in his History of Religious Sects, Volume 2, page 47. Monsignor Henri Gregoire, better known as Abbé Gregoire, was a constitutional bishop, abolitionist, champion of social and civil equality for the Jews in Alsace and Lorraine, and independence for what was then known as Saint-Domingue, which is now known as Haiti. Abbé Gregoire was also a close friend of Guillaume Mauviel, as I mentioned, primate of the Johannite Church of Primitive Christians. Although no definitive catalog can be cited, at least the original Carta Transmissiones, which is a part of the Table d'Or, which comes in as part of the basic statute. Again, going back to our friends here, 1705. Although it could be older, because the statute is changed. It says it was changed in 1705. So there might be a lot of things that were left in from 1682. So you have that piece of it, the original piece, which, as His Eminence knew this morning over the breakfast table, is supposedly housed at the Mark Mason's Hall in London. Now, I don't know what else is there, if there are other portions of this, but I know that I have read, and I'm not going to say that this is true, but I've read that there are other portions of this which are held by the French Masons, the Grand Orient de France. They have a huge museum and they have an archive which is very big, so it's possible that a lot of our stuff is housed there. So I'm going to pause here because then we're going to get into the publishing part of this, and I'll open it up for some questions at this point.
Father, can you comment on the word evangelicon in context with this document?
The first time that I saw that, you know how you see something wrong and it's repeated over and over again? If you're a scholar, you know all about that. And it's such plagiarism, it's incredible. You can see the same wrong statement in exactly the same language over and over and over again. And evangelicon is such a thing. Usually it said the Levitikon, also known as the evangelicon, and then it starts with the mumbo jumbo. You know, Christ was an initiate of Osiris, and you know, we have all these strange rites, and you know, which is true. But so that's where evangelicon comes from. It's just it's a speculation that it's just been repeated ad infinitum.
Is that just a corruption of evangelium?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's possible that they referred to this section.
Right.
Because these things were not one corpus until fabre-palaprat. So that's, I think I should say that explicitly. I didn't, I'm sorry.
Which were in the vellum?
Yeah, the red bits and the rest, you know, but there are parts of the Levitikon, because there's like an introduction. So it's really difficult for me to say that all of this is original, because it's not. There are huge portions of it which are contemporary, sort of like introduction. But they mentioned the table d'or, which is the golden tablets. They're referring to that Carta Transmissiones plus.
So I'm slightly confused. The vellum that fabre-palaprat purchased was the first two parts or the first three parts?
The vellum manuscript.
Yeah.
It contains portions of all three, the first three. It's not exact, as I said, because some things have been added. It's just like,
but the basic statute of the government of the church comes from.
Yeah, some of it comes from here.
So that's presumably not the part that was
fundamental
dated to the 7th century, right?
Right. No. It's just like if you took the book itself now and said, okay, is this from 1831? The same problem.
Right. Okay.
So of course the wonderful part in the beginning.
No, the really good part.
The really good part.
Yeah.
Isn't.
I have a brief one, just that, you know, it's a question actually I've been meaning to ask over the times where we drink scotch and scotch and whatnot. I mean, we all, you know, the lineage, you know, because the table of gold and the charter are pretty well established, but there was actually a side note that I've seen kicking around in one or two places, but with very little substantiation, that there was a second lineage that came that Palaprat was consecrated earlier. That fellow starts with the name A, and I don't have my little scribbles with me, and that supposedly that was also a Templar transmission, and I wasn't sure about the only person who encountered that.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, that there was a second in there, but I've never seen any detail at all. I mean, you know, we've both done some pretty good digging, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there was a line out there that there was a separate.
So this is before Mobio?
Yeah. Yeah. Before or
Before the church.
around. Yeah. Yeah. But But everything I've seen seems to point to, Templar heritage and whatnot, coming from a combination of the lineage that we know about. And of course, all the documentation and previous revivals. But I'd seen, a kind of offhand one-liner saying that there was also a kind of sideways injection, so to speak. But that's I've only ever seen it, and between yourself, myself, and also talking to Bishop Matthews about it. That one-liner is something here I've never seen. I can't even remember where I saw it now.
Yeah, it's funny because he was a very busy man, fabre-palaprat. And, I haven't really talked very much about him after going to medical school, but I'll get to that in a minute after. Because it's really important to understand the man, just to understand where some of this stuff is coming from, and how the kind of cool thing, of course, is that how similar it is to the sort of Johannite mold even today.
You mentioned the charter of transmission in book 3, that I've seen pictures of the quote-unquote Armenia's charter of transmission as a standalone vellum that is housed, I think, in the Grand Orient also, framed in glass.
Mark Mason's hall.
Oh, is it?
I believe.
Yeah, in English, yeah. Is it the same document that got split up, or is there a
Likely there were many more than one.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just like any of you that have been watching the Borgias knows that you can forge a lot of stuff.
Okay.
And so, I mean, no, not forge, but make copies. It was very common to make copies, and that's not a forgery. But, it gets a little gray.
Yeah.
Well, Pope Nicholas V said. Yeah. Any other questions before I move on? No? Okay. So, a little bit about the background of the publication of the book. It was actually published several times, and there were internal publications for the order and for the church, which happened between these two dates. So if you're confused and you have a copy online, by the way, if you want to see one of the original 19th century copies in French, you can do so online. Now it's available at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which has an incredible digital collection called Gallica, and the 2 L's, Gallica. And you can do just a site search and look it up. So the original 1831 edition, which was the most prevalent, so that's why it's a major publication. I think most of the copies which are available now date from that time. There are reprints of an 1820s version as well, but from what I've seen, they're exactly the same. Although there is a version of the 1831 copy, which makes me think that maybe Dr. fabre-palaprat or one of his associates at the time, right before he died, might have been thinking of making some changes, because there are original, I don't know who wrote it, but it's 19th century script, crossing stuff out, writing, making notes and margins and stuff like that, which you can find online as well at the National Library of France.
What exactly would have been the science of dating vellum in that particular time?
I honestly don't know. I do know that he would have he asked for 2 kinds of dating.
Right.
One was, do you think this is, how old do you think this is? And I assume that they would base it on materials where that kind of thing, and then looking at the textual analysis, which he did with Abbé Gregoire. So he in the sense, and this is again a Johannite trade. We don't have pissing matches with the Roman Catholic Church. We ask them their opinion. What do you think about this, Abbé Gregoire? And Abbé Gregoire says, you know what? It's probably real. But he says, but I have no idea if it's true. Right? Of course, we don't know if any of this stuff is true.
Those are two very different questions.
Right, yeah. Right. So, you know, but he's perfectly happy to say, yes, this is real. This is real. And there were connections. But to me, it's most interesting that as, you could say, progressive as Abbé Gregoire was, he saw no problem with remaining a Roman Catholic. And having his associate and very close friend, Guillaume Mauviel, who was actually from not far from where he was from. They were both from the north of France. And they were, you know, as far as I understand, obviously pretty friendly. Because I know for a fact that people go to each other's funerals. So that tells you something about what their relationship was like. So there was none of this, you know, you're heretics and this is all garbage. It was a frank discussion. And a frank disagreement, which is fine. A 25 franc discussion, to be exact. So anyway, most of the copies are available from the 1831 edition. It was actually published by the Librairie des Chrétiens Primitifs, which is the bookstore of the Johannites. And it was done at the actual printing shop of somebody named Machaut. And it was at, this is an interesting address. It was at Rue du Roi Doré Saint-Louis, which is now called Rue du Doré, I think, or Roi Doré, number 4. Now, if you've ever been to Paris, that neighborhood is called the Marais. And Marais is a very, very beautiful part of Paris. It's a very influential part of Paris. But for you literary people out there, that address where our church's original bookstore used to be was 3 doors down from number 7 Roi Doré, which is where a certain Mr. Honoré de Balzac lived. Thought that was an interesting little piece of history. But going back to the Marais, significant to Johannites because it was founded by the poor knights of Temple Solomon. So, the Templars founded the original buildings in the Marais, and it became, in 1240, it was built as a fortified church just outside of Paris, the original medieval walls. And basically the existence of the Templar Church in the Middle Ages turned the district into an attractive area. And so many religious and academic and government institutions were later built around there. So it was quite a different kind of place from where they started, which was basically the red light district. The very first, and there were subsequent rooms that were let out across the not across the river, but down on near Les Halles, which is where they used to have the central marketplace in Paris, and they had a lot of fishmongers and stuff like that, and sort of interesting houses with interesting people who checked in hourly, and so yeah, it was a very shady district, and so you can see that between 1812 and 1831, the Johannite Church significantly improved.